On the southern edge of the Tiber, where Rome's stone seemed to drink the cold, a sharper wind moved through scattered autumn leaves and carried with it a tension that would not name itself. Those who lingered near the river, soldiers on leave, clerks, old veterans, women with news-hungry faces, kept turning their thoughts toward distant frontiers, as if the air itself were waiting for a sound that refused to arrive. The hills across the water stood calm and indifferent. No messenger crossed the bridges with a sealed tablet promising triumph. No courier appeared with a letter smelling of hearth smoke and home. Rome had been reinforced. The great machine had been oiled again with men and metal, and the legions had forced themselves to look away from Britain, the province of wet skies, wild coasts, and stubborn tribes that bled and vanished into the north like smoke. And yet, the city could not quite forget. The same names returned in whispers, the same half-remembered fears. There were murmurs of a fresh rising among those peoples who had felt the sword again and again, and still had not bent their necks. In taverns and barracks, the talk passed from mouth to mouth. The 9th, quartered for winter, repositioning since the late summer, its strength drawn toward the northern coasts, where Rome's map thinned and rumor began. With each retelling, the story grew darker. It was as though a second night, the kind no dawn could soften, had begun to stretch its shadow over Roman imagination. Absolute night. Not merely the turning of hours, but the sense that somewhere beyond the empire's lamps and roads, there was a silence capable of swallowing an army. Behind heavy shields, in the discipline that made Rome itself possible, the 5th cohort, men old in service, scarred by campaigns and hardened by routine, kept their posture and watched the sky. Stars hung above them like cold ornaments on black cloth. On a night like this, time did not linger long enough for eagerness to sour into impatience. Quiet songs moved through the ranks in a low current, passed from man to man without ceremony. Looking backward, they pushed away the thought of death. Looking forward, they held onto a picture of victory so bright it could replace the sun. Then came the trumpet. Its notes softened to suit the darkness, flowing through the camp like a remembered promise. In such hours, men imagined the world with a strange, near-divine distance, its beauty, its future, its ancient past, and the past inevitably filled with ships, those mountain-like hulls that carried Rome's will across waters into lands that resisted being known. Wars rose and broke like rivers against their banks. Histories surged and receded, and somewhere in all of it, there was a road, tide-marked, half-erased, running straight toward disappearance. The promise of victory. Once the 9th had looked south and seen certainty. Italy in spring was a persuasion. Hills warmed by light, valleys breathing out the scent of ripe fruit and wildflowers, a land that seemed created to be governed. Rome shone with the confidence of its own story. Peace and prosperity offered as proof of destiny. The Pax Romana, begun under Augustus and strengthened under emperors who understood both politics and steel, rested on the backs of soldiers and the wings of eagles. The 9th carried the empire's northern burden. It had marched long roads and held hard ground. Its men wanted a final campaign, one last motion of conquest that would seal the border and silence the endless alarms. In their tents and lines, hope was plated with sacrifice. They bled for the emperor's glory and for gods whose names were spoken more out of habit than belief. They lived on letters and rumors, on half-heard counsel, on superstition that grew in the gaps where certainty should have been. Fear, shared and unspoken, warmed them like a blanket woven from every warning ever uttered. Prevent what the gods hint at. Strike first. End this. Yet the earth beneath their feet offered no prophecy. The roads did not tell them that Britannia could turn a march into a grave. No stone, no wind, no bird call explained how quickly a routine movement could become a story no one finished. As months folded into each other, as pines thickened and the air cooled, and nights returned to their longer rule, something changed. A heaviness fell over the empire. Not the weight of a single defeat, but the suggestion of a missing piece. The echo of a legion that did not return became a shadow that even strong voices could not disperse. There was no triumph thick with the smell of burned cities. No parade chased defeated peoples into the wilderness. Evidence stayed mute. Not in the stones, not in the cloth of banners, not even in the careful archives where Rome recorded itself. The Ninth marched with victory in its mouth, but no one could say where the road ended. And in the silence that followed, the hills seemed to ask the question Rome could not stop asking. Why did they not return? The Ninth in the journals of Rome. While legionaries moved under orders, other borders bled. The empire was never quiet everywhere at once. Along another frontier, knives met flesh. Disputes turned into deaths. The soil drank what Rome could not name politely. In the city, the annals remained selective, grand enough to praise, brief enough to hide. They preserved emperors and campaigns, but not the private pain of separated units. What centuries felt while staring into dark woods, what men feared as the sky bruised red, what hope sounded like when it began to collapse. Rome's machinery continued. A young governor returned from Syria, ambitious and clean of memory, preparing colonies as if the world were a board laid out for empire's pieces. In the public mind, drama belonged to the arena, not to the ledger of distant suffering. Yet history has a way of undermining its own disguises. The Ninth's trouble was not wholly secret. In scattered communications, warnings appeared, captains writing to the Senate, officers disputing withdrawals and deployments, anxious references that later readers would pretend were trivial. The records existed, but the empire had learned to glance past what it preferred not to hold. Over time, repetition turned history into theater. Roles recast, speeches adjusted, inconvenient continuity blurred. Silence became a form of discipline. But even so, the hills, those stubborn witnesses, seemed to keep their own account. The season before the Ninth vanished remained the most visible riddle, the one question that would not dissolve. Where did the legion go, and why does the empire's memory suddenly fail at precisely that edge? The Ninth's earlier path lay half asleep in the fog of time. Now only the work of later minds, scholars, commanders, seekers, could attempt to force clarity out of obscurity. If other provinces could be traced, why not this? If shipwrecks and disasters could be catalogued, why did rumor of disbandment or annihilation in Britain remain so strangely unanchored? After the hinterland darkened and the thread snapped, Rome could say only this: beyond a certain point, nothing could be traced. The Ninth's world: camp, legionaries, and duty. To understand how a legion might disappear, you first have to see what a legion was when it still existed. A cohort's life was camp life: motion, transition, the temporary made permanent through repetition. A camp was not a town, though it could resemble one. It was a machine designed for moving violence, built quickly, used fully, dismantled without sentiment. Under blazing heat or biting cold, among insects, sickness, mud, and ash, soldiers searched for rhythm, the cadence of duty, and the reliability of training. Sometimes a fever lifted without warning, as if a god had relented. Sometimes a sacred spring opened the possibility that life might be more than endurance. But the routine was relentless until something interrupted it. A letter, a rumor, an omen sharp enough to hook the mind and pull it away from ordinary time. Duty lived everywhere. It was softened only by the strict comfort of sameness. Within a camp, every person and animal became part of a functioning army. Cooks, aides, pack animals, tool makers, scavengers. The blacksmith was indispensable, an artisan behind every shield and blade, sharing with the tent maker the rare privilege of belonging to the march without being consumed by it. Each day's order was training in disguise, repeating tasks until they existed in muscle as surely as in thought. And then, always, there were moments when waiting turned into countdown. A punishment, a violent brawl, a sudden message that meant a battle was coming. Even animals sensed it. The change in voices, the shift in posture, the way men stopped joking and began checking straps. Whatever gossip drifted outside the palisade, whatever charms and superstitions men carried in their pockets, none of it changed the reality that countless letters went unanswered. That distance widened, that time at the frontier bent the mind toward darkness. The daily life of a cohort. Morning began with sound. A trumpet tore sleep from bodies that had barely recovered. Some men rose slow, blinking and bitter. Others welcomed the cold with a loudness meant to prove they still had strength. Outside the rough wooden doors of the barracks, watchful eyes scanned the camp's edges and the surrounding trees. Small fires smoked, thin and stubborn. The smell of porridge and eggs drifted, promising warmth and company. For a moment, life felt almost human. Men ate, talked, laughed, until command fell over it like a blade. Then armor was strapped on, sandals tightened, weapons checked. Patrols went out. Gear was arranged as if neatness could prevent disaster. Training followed. Formations repeated for battle. Ceremonies rehearsed for honor. Drills performed for survival. The work changed by the hour, but the structure stayed the same. Pleasure, if it came at all, waited until night. A cohort, roughly 480 men, was a family built from necessity. Bonds formed in shared hardship, in jokes made at the latrines, in quiet help offered when no one was watching. Affection tangled with rumor. Superstition took root where knowledge failed. Sometimes a stolen hour of levity, a Greek phrase half understood, a shared memory of wine and youth could make the burden lift. Then came letters, sharp as spears, gentle as hands. They pierced the illusion of safety. Some were tender, some were cruel. Some carried threats dressed as devotion, reminders that the world behind the Legion continued its own wars. A man could read a line from home and laugh, and that laughter might keep him alive another week, until duty returned to claim him. Beyond the shield. Letters, rumors, and omens. Stories of distant fighting filled the ninth's days like smoke. Letters spoke of victories, feasts, births, funerals, ordinary life surviving somewhere far from the mud. Such messages became sacred objects, held close, reread, envied by those who received none. Men broke seals too often, drank too deeply from the feeling of being remembered. But letters were heavy too, literally and figuratively. Their weight had to be divided, shared among centurions, carried across miles of uncertainty. Rumors traveled alongside them. Talk of a long-awaited campaign, of royal audiences, of honors promised. And always there was a price, as if the gods demanded balance. A neglected statue, a sick animal, a poorly spoken prayer. Omens multiplied. The horizon bled red at dusk, and tempted men to imagine fire thrown into the clouds. Animals died strangely. Birds behaved as if guided by something unseen. Summer storms turned northern ice into foul runoff. Autumn winds heaved waves against hostile shores. The past haunted the ranks until silence began to creep in. Not silence as the absence of sound, but silence as the absence of meaning. The last surviving cohort of the 9th was said to have been stationed along cold stretches of the Thames, or held in permanent quarters where monotony poured down from violet hills like a curse. Rivers became lifeless channels. The land felt weary, and the legion, once the pride of Rome, seemed to be condemned not only to danger, but to political disappearance, the kind of erasure that can happen long before a sword swings. In the end, the peaceful hills met steel and war. Then, as if the world itself swallowed its own noise, everything fell into a muffled hush. Clothes, bones, names, covered. And from that point onward, the 9th vanished, becoming a secret kept only by wind and cattle and the indifferent ground. The final campaign, distant frontiers and silent hills. Far from familiar cities, hundreds of miles from known fortresses, and still far from the empire's farthest edge, lay land that Rome had secured and yet never truly possessed. Britannia. Cliffs collapsing into sea, coasts carved by storms that treated stone as if it were sand. Inland, valleys spread beneath heavy clouds like dark chains draped over mountains. Most days, the land lay smooth and quiet. Then the north wind would rise and make it angry, like a sea that suddenly remembered it could drown. Beyond those valleys were regions described as empty and desolate, a country people said had once been lived in, as if life itself had fled. There, moorland glens echoed weakly, rivers thinned, and silence reigned. To look upon such a place was to feel a warning without words. Past the last hills, smoke from hidden hearths proved that people still worked, still endured. Morning brought promise. Spoils of the day seemed near. Then, suddenly, a shift, a discord in the landscape's music. A line appeared, drawn across the vale from west to east. Black, shimmering in dawn light, approaching with steady inevitability. A line of dread. Closer and closer it came, swallowing brightness, erasing dew's sparkle, flattening the gentle shapes of slope and hollow. And in its wake, quiet. The 9th was gone, an entire legion, a host. The murmur of its movement ceased. The glamour that held eyes and ears was broken. Everything lay still, white and lifeless, like snow fallen on soft blossoms, hiding a grave that no one marked. Britannia and the northern marches. The province's climate shaped its soul, impermanence threaded with solemnity. North of the camps, bright fields could exist beside a river, dull as lead. Riders flashed across the landscape like a white streak against charcoal sky, rushing between garrison and watchtower. A village stream might lap gently, disturbed only by boys and scullions throwing stones, laughing as if the empire's burden did not exist. In moments like that, the soldiers looked almost like ordinary men, like boys with time. Summer could trick you into believing the world was safe, but the North did not stay kind. Remoteness became more remote as months passed. Even the sun seemed to withdraw. Mist turned everything gray, wrapping land and mind in a shroud. For the first time in a long stretch, months could pass without battle, an absence that felt more frightening than combat. The wind came low and unseen, burying bits of uniform in the ground, scattering dried flakes of skin into the air. Flags hung limp. The call to arms went quiet. It felt as if the earth itself had lost faith in weapons. A dog barked far away. The hills watched. The plain began to feel deserted. more than a year might pass without rumor of change, until the silence itself became the change. The last march, a march that disappeared. We do not know the march's true name, or the exact count of its cohorts, or the day it crossed the last familiar line. It exists in memory as a final campaign defined not by a recorded battle, but by absence. A forward unit moved north and simply vanished. No warning, no clash that echoed back, no report that survived. No one spoke of it again, except in the indirect language of fear. Only marks remained, scars in the earth, roads that seemed to lead nowhere, gashes cut by boredom, despair, and marching feet. It was as if the road itself had become a creature that moved without men, an empty beast dragging its belly across the land, swallowing its own story. In the south, winter came as it always did. Cold air from the northeast emptied fields of vapor. Streams slowed. Rivers fell quiet. In the north, mountains stared into gathering snow like mouths opening. Snow fell for days, filling valleys, smothering heights, pounding rooftops, while the wind searched flat land back and forth. Mist thickened until distance became an illusion. And still, the Ninth's march was quiet. The kind armies performed day after day, week after week, until suddenly there is no after. Processions of riders came and went, pushing speed where they could, waiting for a break in heavy rain. Mothers tended hearths. Children slept. Life continued around the edges, as if the great movement of empire were merely weather. Then the weather turned, and the legion's track ended. Clues and conflicts. The stories that survive. What remains are fragments. An empty fort, a missing book, a fading inscription at the empire's edge. 3 stories, different and intertwined, each whispering something about a march that slipped off the maps. They hint at battle, defeat, reconciliation, at shadows moving between hills. Beyond Britain, other echoes stir. Somewhere, perhaps, lost scrolls once existed, narratives written by hands we cannot name, salted by time, marked only by the color of stone and the persistence of rumor. War at the world's edge. The Ninth vanished, leaving a shape in the imagination even when the facts refused to stand. A modern search crosses the Tiber again and again, chasing old reverberations. Some traditions insist on victory, that the Ninth survived, that it returned, that it was reassigned quietly as Rome's priorities shifted. But victory in the wet north is never simple. When the Ninth last took the field, perhaps it marched not for glory, but simply to survive another day. These neglected remnants, fort, book, inscription, may be the start of a renewed narrative, a re-evaluation of Rome's northern story, a look at what native peoples remembered and what empire tried to forget. In the last nights of a tired world, Rome armed itself not only against enemies, but against its own shadows, ruins, inscriptions, and disputed chronicles. Evidence becomes a battlefield when the truth is missing. Ruins and texts, proof that something once stood, often tell stories that disagree. Whispers multiply until they become noise. In Britain, nostalgia for Rome hardens into stone. History reveals much and still leaves more doubtful. Some inscriptions suggest the Ninth struggled on, even if not in triumph. Others hint at officers, at names that fit neatly and therefore tempt belief. Somewhere far removed in time, a later scribe claims the legion returned and was given a quiet post, an ending too tidy to trust completely. Other writers, less careful, tell wilder tales, stories mixed from rumor and rage, stitched with sensational cruelty, shouted rather than argued. They insist the Ninth never breathed again in that cursed land. A later account seems to repeat the claim. And yet, scattered hints elsewhere, odd stones, distant references, refuse to let the matter settle. Like a finely made object that survives centuries but loses its purpose, the story trembles, readable only by those willing to examine every splinter. The search through time, modern echoes. The inquiry begins with absence, a missing chapter where a catastrophe should be. But absence is fertile. Like a footprint that time cannot wash away, it draws thinkers into new routes. Every emptied space fills with imagined memory. Every voice that repeats a voice invents an origin. Many modern retellings celebrate brave frontiersmen carrying Rome's power into darkness. Yet even these stories often feel like they are circling something hungry, like vultures gathering before a storm. The ninth becomes a symbol, a shape that can be filled with tragedy, pride, horror, wonder. It appears in painting, fiction, scholarship, film, each method offering not an answer, but a new angle on what might have happened. Other voices speak more quietly, of the very hills the ninth was said to vanish into, of political reports suggesting alternate paths into that wilderness. They imply shifting control over lands, tribes gaining ground, uncertainty over whether Rome should push deeper or turn elsewhere. Even letters from home begin to sound like echoes, comfort fading into silence, not silence of sound, but silence of meaning. Theories and debates. What Romans kept or forgot. So what happened? Could the ninth have been lost in catastrophe, destroyed in battle, captured and sold, erased so thoroughly that even Rome's administrative mind could not bear to record it? For centuries, debate has moved in circles. A sudden defeat is plausible, even if it seems contradictory. Why risk such a massive formation against foes described as undisciplined? Yet history is full of arrogance punished. Defeat becomes possible in certain terrain, in certain weather, with certain mistakes, especially if commanders believed one final blow would end the problem. Other explanations linger at the edge. Flood, earthquake, accident, disease. Or the more political possibility, disbandment, redeployment, deliberate forgetting. An army might be pulled away to serve priorities elsewhere, its disappearance transformed into silence by the state's need for control. The nature of later Roman reaction sometimes seems to point toward abandonment rather than slaughter. What deepens the mystery is not just that a legion vanished, but that its absence stayed absent. No later appearance in expected lists, no clear reemergence in recorded campaigns. If it had merely been moved, why does the paperwork not follow? If it was destroyed, why does the record not thunder with outrage? Theories stack. None closes the door. Battle, captivity, or obliteration. Three endings remain most discussed: defeat, capture, extermination. Each has its own logic, each its own weight. Weather might have played a role. Logistics might have snapped under pressure. The Caledonians, if they were the enemy, might have drawn strength from their very desperation. Rome might have advanced beyond the fourth and found itself stretched too thin to recover when trouble struck. And yet, even an extermination is not a tidy conclusion. Societies forget what they cannot use. A legion's end might fall out of memory, not because it was small, but because it was too large, too humiliating to keep alive. Commanders might have cared less than we imagined, so long as the season held and other borders stayed secure. Rome could march in circles, leaving garrisons behind, avoiding major disturbance until the disturbance became unavoidable. If the ninth went north with confidence, why do we feel, in the fragments, an inexplicable sense of caution, as if someone knew the end was possible? Weather, logistics, and the fog of war. The year's weather and the army's condition do not neatly suggest a single pitched battle. Heavy rains in previous seasons had already strained transport. Rivers swollen, banks broken. Now, as the season closed, the ground softened into mire. The army entered deep months in the field. Supplies grew heavier, movement more difficult, sickness more common. And then, the bulk of the southern front under cover, the bulk of the army strangely moving north, the 9th's disappearance followed by silence that no one can reasonably explain. If captivity happened, you would expect traces, stories, inscriptions, fractured Latin on strange stones, rumors anchored in names. The fortified villas and watchtowers along the Forth should have known something, unless what was feared most was precisely what no one wanted told. The fog of war hides more than chronology. On the day the Legion vanished, it left no report, no letters, no surviving voice. Another shadow settled over the land. The legacy unfolds. Lessons from a vanished legion. For Romans, surviving evidence can console. Interpretations pulled from landscape, labor, and tradition. For stones, what was never forgotten remains legible. Perhaps the stones should be read more often. Something departed in that silence. Something larger than a unit designation. It marked not only the 9th, but the legions and provinces, and even the craft of history. People drifted away from the meaning of their work. Emperors dreamed only of immortality. The dead stopped feeding the earth in the way living cultures require. Heroes became fables, and fables became substitutes for truth. There were wounds left open. The fallen of the 9th, in some sense, were forgotten without deserving it. In Britain, echoes linger. In watery places, tired winds carry offers that have no end. Blood-sent kin still walk old paths. And still, the farewell's meaning is lost in mist. The voices of the 9th, if we imagine them, still ask, was it death in battle? Was it capture by a stronger will? Did life go down with the flag? Or did the legion's end resemble the last vision of a prince leaving shore for the unknown? Do streams carry memory away? Or do rocks keep it where no echo returns? Memory in stones and scrolls, ruins, inscriptions, chronicles, each speaks some part of the past. Yet the 9th's final fate remains uncertain. No surviving record describes the moment of its end, whether by battle, exile, surrender, or total obliteration. Reports falter. Then they stop. When news came again from far edges, its tone shifted, from joy to gravity, from gravity to dread. Seasons altered the emotional geography of empire. Summer brought bright tokens, shells from ocean coasts, painted shields, flame-touched glass, varnished weapons, the harsh blue of the far north. Rumor embroidered these gifts with landscape. Empty hills, dark fog, roaring sea, lightning under purple cloud. Then came the death of a comrade, tragic, fitting, and still meaningless in the face of the larger absence. The campaign lands. Then, the campaign day. The last march calls itself destiny. Men, horses, wealth, discipline, all moving as one. An arm reaches out, a hand turns, and the legion vanishes. Then and there. Rain, snow, sun, wind, all erase footsteps. No one sees prints on snow. No one hears the sea roll them away. The great river hurries onward, losing itself into distant ocean, indifferent. The 9th in imagination and myth. The 9th remains most alive not in archives, but in story. It is studied now less as a documented presence and more as an echo, something absent that still shapes the air around it. Fiction holds it. Cinema and novels call it back. Art and scholarship turn it into reflection. A culture's story carries fragments of memory. When lines and images pass from generation to generation, they reshape the past into something the present can hold. And so, the ninth becomes a figure in modern imagination, a taste of shadow, a fascination with loss. Old poems and later legends fold Rome into their own mythic frames. They speak of fortresses and heroes and betrayals, mixing Roman steel with local names until the boundary between record and invention dissolves. The ninth is preserved not as a fact, but as a haunting. Epilogue. If they could speak again, look at the Briton and the Saxon, the Scot and the Pict, the Gaul and all the rest. What did they truly care for the empire's concerns? Many cared only for dispute, for grim warnings, for treachery and plotting. Such talk, Rome told itself, could not threaten loyalty and courage. Or could it? Perhaps what those troubled minds feared was not Rome in general, but the nine, the sacred standard, the old discipline, the gods invoked over marching feet. Legends say the ninth once walked beyond death and out of sight, and that it could still emerge from the thick mist of myth, walking and speaking again. If their voices returned, what would they tell? What despair would they confess? Would they describe the crossing where iron-studded sandals crunched on new land, then faded away? Could it be that no Roman survived? That not one soldier escaped to warn the others? They do not know, or we do not. But the question haunts the imagination. In an empire governed by silence, perhaps only death is allowed to speak. Such a whisper, if it rose after so long, might be dangerous, might smell like rot to those who have learned to live without truth. Still, one day, something motionless may be unraveled. Conclusion. Rumor continues to carry the ninth like a ghost. Was it defeated? Captured? Erased? Each possibility deepens the mystery. If a battle swallowed them, why do the northern hills remain so still? If captivity claimed them, where are the chains? If annihilation ended them, what remained to mark the grave? Across the known world, these questions pulse through stone and scroll. No answer closes the case. Yet much is still readable, if not fully understood. In the late 20th century and beyond, the ninth rose again in art and literature, returning with renewed force in modern imagination. And each time we look, we ask again what happened when the cohort marched into the north. Why the story breaks, why the road ends, why the echoes keep crossing the Tiber. Because memory flickers brightest in the dark corners of history. And because some silences are too large to ignore.